The hall was older than most civilizations. Its ceiling was carved from black stone pulled from a dead star, and the walls held the names of every Drakkar who had stood in this place before, thousands of names, stretching back so far that the oldest ones were in a language no living thing could read anymore. The floor glowed faintly with heat. It always did. Dragons did not build cold places. Today, the hall was full of outsiders. Every major species in the galactic conclave had sent someone. The Velhari delegation sat in the high observer seats, tall still, their compound eyes catching the light. The Sorathi ambassadors stood near the east wall, triple-jointed arms folded behind their backs. The Gren had sent 4 representatives who took up roughly the space of a small transport ship. Everyone was dressed formally. Everyone was watching. Everyone understood the gravity of what was about to happen. Everyone except Sol. He was standing near the back of the hall, half hidden behind a support column that was easily 4 times wider than he was. He had a protein bar in one hand and a datapad in the other. He was reading field incident reports from the outering stations. They were overdue. His supervisor had flagged them twice. He was working through them now because the ceremony was not supposed to start for another 20 minutes, and he had made the reasonable assumption that there was nothing for a junior human liaison officer to actually do here except stand quietly and not embarrass the Terran delegation. His name was Sol. He had been with the Conclave Diplomatic Service for 6 years. He was not particularly tall, not particularly loud, and not particularly anything that would make a person look twice. He had short, dark hair and the kind of face that was difficult to remember after a conversation. His uniform was clean but slightly wrinkled at the collar. He had been told on multiple occasions by multiple supervisors that he was good at his job in the way that a very reliable water pipe was good at its job. Functional, unnoticed, present. He finished one report and moved to the next. The ceremony began. Rin entered through the great stone doors at the far end of the hall, and the temperature in the room rose by 4 degrees. She was small by Drakkar standards. Her scales were the dark red of old embers, and her wings were folded tight against her sides in the formal posture her tutors had drilled into her for 3 years. She walked slowly because that was the ritual. She was supposed to take in the weapons first, to let her instincts speak. The weapons were arranged in a long spiral that filled the center of the hall. Every type, every age. Blades of folded star metal, axes older than the conclave itself, plasma lances that hummed with contained light, resonance whips that could cut through hull plating, ancient flame spears from the early wars, force amplifiers set on pedestals of carved bone. The collection had been assembled over centuries. It was, by any measure, the greatest gathering of arms in the known galaxy. Rin walked past all of it. She walked slowly. She looked at each weapon. She was not ignoring them. The observers could see her eyes moving, careful, measuring. She paused at a star metal blade and studied it for a long moment. She moved on. She stopped at one of the plasma lances and tilted her head slightly. She moved on. She walked the full spiral without touching anything. Then she turned toward the edges of the hall. Elder Vaughn, seated on the high ceremonial stone at the front, said nothing. This was not unusual. Sometimes young dragons needed to feel the space before choosing. He watched. Rin walked toward the south wall, then she stopped. She was looking at the back of the hall. More specifically, she was looking at the support column near the back of the hall and the human standing partially behind it, reading something on a small glowing rectangle, eating. The room noticed. One by one, heads turned. The Velhari observers leaned forward slightly. The Sorathi ambassadors exchanged a look. The Gren did not move, but their breathing changed. Sol felt the shift in the room, the way you feel a room go quiet when someone drops something. He looked up from his datapad. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the small red dragon standing in the center of the floor, looking directly at him. He looked behind himself at the stone wall. He looked back at the dragon. She raised one foreleg and pointed at him with a single extended claw. She held it there, steady, certain, the way you point at something you have already decided on. The hall did not make a sound. Elder Vaughn rose from the ceremonial stone. He was very old and very large, and he rose slowly, but when he was standing, the weight of his presence filled the room the way heat fills a closed space, total, inescapable. His voice was deep enough to feel in the chest. "The hatchling has chosen," he said. "Her weapon has been named." Sol lowered his datapad. Every eye in the hall was on him. He checked behind himself one more time, just to be certain. There was nothing there but the wall. The argument started before the echo of Vaughn's voice finished dying in the stone hall. 3 Velhari observers were on their feet within seconds. The lead Sorasi ambassador was speaking quietly and rapidly into a comm device. The human delegation's senior attaché, a woman named Commander Dara, had gone the specific shade of pale that meant she was doing the math and did not like any of the answers. She pushed through the crowd towards Sol with the focused movement of someone walking into a fire they cannot avoid. "Do not say anything," she said when she reached him. "Not one word, not to anyone." "I wasn't planning to," Sol said. "I mean it. I understood you the first time." She looked at the young dragon, who had not moved. Rin was still standing in the center of the hall, watching the chaos with calm, dark eyes. She did not look uncertain. She did not look like someone who had made a mistake. She looked, if anything, faintly satisfied. Dara looked back at Sol. "Do you know what the bonding ritual means under Drakkar law?" "I'm reading about it right now," Sol said. He had switched his datapad from incident reports to Conclave legal archives. He was a fast reader. His expression did not change much as he read, which Dara found deeply unsettling. "It means I'm her weapon bearer. It's a protected bond, cannot be refused, transferred, or renegotiated by either party, enforceable across all Conclave jurisdictions." "You're a person," Dara said. "The law apparently doesn't distinguish." "Sol, I know." Elder Vaughn called the hall to order, and the noise settled into something tense and barely contained. He addressed the room with the measured authority of someone who had been managing difficult situations for 800 years. He confirmed the bonding. He explained, for the benefit of the non-Drakkar observers, what it meant. He explained that no part of the Drakkar code allowed for reversal. He did not sound happy. He sounded like a very old dragon who had just watched something unprecedented happen in his most sacred hall and was choosing, for the moment, to manage it correctly rather than react. Delegate Karros of the Velhari delegation spoke next. He did not request the floor. He simply spoke, loudly enough that stopping him would have required a scene. "This is a transparent embarrassment," he said. "The hatchling is young. She is confused. A human is not a weapon. A human is barely a conclave member. This should be set aside before it becomes a problem." Rin turned her head toward Karros. She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away, in the way that a person looks away from something they have already decided is not worth more of their time. Karros kept talking. Rin stopped listening. Later, in a smaller room off the main hall, the human delegation sat around a table with Rin and Elder Vaughn and 3 Drakkar Council advisors. Sol sat at one end of the table. Rin sat across from him and studied him the way someone studies a tool they have selected and are now examining up close. Dara tried to open a diplomatic path out of the situation. She was good at her job. She used careful language and cited 3 separate conclave frameworks. Elder Vaughn listened politely and said no to all of it. Then Dara tried a different angle. She suggested, gently, that perhaps Rin had not fully understood what she was pointing at, that perhaps she had been gesturing at something near the human or past him. Rin spoke for the first time since the ceremony. "I watched everyone in that hall for 2 hours," she said. Her galactic standard was clean and precise. Every ambassador was performing. Every delegate was watching to see who else was watching them. Everyone was thinking about how they looked. She paused. He was reading reports. He checked the exits 4 times in the first hour. He finished his work, then he watched the weapons, not the crowd. He was the only one in that room paying attention to real things. The room was quiet. "Every weapon in that hall would be used for whoever holds it," Rin said. He will not be used by anyone. That is rarer than star metal. She looked at Sol directly. I chose correctly. Sol put down his datapad. I have two conditions, he said. Everyone looked at him. Elder Vaughn's expression suggested this was not how weapon bearers traditionally responded. First, Sol said, I stay human. No modifications, no enhancements, no procedures. I do this as I am. Vaughn nodded slowly. The law did not require alteration. Second, reasonable meal plan. I don't know what assignments look like in this role, but I'm not doing it on protein bars indefinitely. Rin looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. It was not quite a smile. Her face was not built for human expressions, but her eyes changed. She turned to Elder Vaughn. I chose correctly, she said again. Within 48 hours, the story was on every major galactic news network. Analysts debated it. Traditionalists condemned it. 3 separate Drakkar hardline groups filed formal complaints with the Conclave. 2 Velhari political commentators called it proof that humans should not have been admitted to the Conclave at all. And in that first 48 hours, before Rin's new weapon bearer had even been officially registered in the Drakkar bonding record, there were 3 assassination attempts against Sol. He was not in his quarters for any of them. He had checked the exits on his first day in the new assignment and had spent each night somewhere else. Rin received the security report the next morning. She read it 3 times. Then she asked the station's system to pull the corridor footage. She watched it 9 times before her morning briefing. The outring stations were not glamorous postings. They sat at the far edge of conclave-mapped space, where the trade lanes thinned out and the legal infrastructure got patchy, and the kind of problems that could not be solved in polite meeting rooms tended to end up. Station Harrow 9 was one of the older ones, a long cylinder of metal and composite that smelled of recycled air and old grease, home to about 6,000 people from 11 different species, including roughly 300 humans who had been running a small cargo hub there for about 12 years. Sol and Rin had been assigned there while the political situation from the bonding settled. The Conclave's way of handling things that needed time to cool down was to send them somewhere far away. They arrived on a Drakkar diplomatic transport, which caused a stir. Dragons did not come to outering stations as a general rule. The station's port authority flagged the arrival 3 times and then stopped asking questions and just cleared the docking bay. The problem on Harrow 9 revealed itself within 6 hours of their arrival. The way problems that have been suppressed for a long time tend to reveal themselves when someone new walks through the door. A woman from the human cargo hub found Sol in the station's common area and sat down across from him with the look of someone who had been waiting for a reason to talk for a long time. Her name was Pell. She ran the hub's logistics. She told Sol, quietly and without drama, that for the past 8 months, a Velhari-connected trading faction called the Darath Group had been charging station residents protection fees disguised as port inspection surcharges. The fees were rising every month. 3 station residents had tried to file conclave trade complaints. All 3 complaints had been quietly blocked at the regional intake level. Nobody could prove how. Everyone had a suspicion. Sol listened to all of it. He asked 4 questions. He asked to see the payment records. Rin had heard it all from across the room. When Pell left, Rin walked over and sat across from Sol in a way that made the chair creak with concern for its own structural future. Show me where their ships are docked, she said. No, Sol said. He was looking at the payment records on his datapad. Rin looked at him. If you burn their ships, Sol said, without looking up, Karos's network spends the next 2 years turning you into the story. Young unstable dragon destroys private property in neutral station. Drakkar bonding ritual produces violence. Humans dragging dragons into criminal behavior. They write that story in their sleep, and it follows you for a decade. He scrolled through the records. The moment we touch their ships, we lose. Then what? Rin said. The Darath Group is registered under Conclave Commercial Charter 41, Sol said. Charter 41 requires all port inspection fees to be calculated by the station's own neutral assessor, not the inspecting party. The surcharges they're charging are based on their own internal rate table. He looked up. They've been in violation of their own operating charter for 8 months. Rin was quiet for a moment. That means the complaints were not just blocked, they were blocked fraudulently. Logged fraud at the intake level escalates automatically to Conclave's central review. It bypasses regional oversight entirely. Sol set the datapad down, but we need the 3 blocked complainants to refile under the fraud designation, not the standard trade complaint form. Different intake path. It goes somewhere Darath's contacts can't reach. Will the people here do that? They might if someone they trust explains it to them. Rin looked at him. You want me to speak to them? You're bonded, Drakkar. The Darath group will think twice about pressuring anyone who's just had a conversation with a dragon. And you're not threatening anyone, you're just present. There was a pause. That is, Rin said slowly, surprisingly subtle for a species that has been in space for less than a century. We've been doing politics for a lot longer than that, Sol said. The next 2 days were careful and quiet. Sol worked the legal paperwork. Rin walked the station. She did not threaten anyone. She looked at things. She asked questions about the station's history. She sat in the common area and ate a meal from the station's kitchen and told the cook it was better than what she had been served on the diplomatic transport, which was true. People talked to her. People talked around her. The Darath group's local representative, a thin Velhari male who went by the name Set, watched all of this from a distance and made several calls off-station. On the 3rd day, Sol filed a formal request to Elder Vaughn, not as a complaint, as a legal deposition from a registered weapon-bearer in active diplomatic service, citing 8 months of charter violations and fraudulent complaint suppression at the Conclave intake level. A deposition from a weapon-bearer in active service carried different weight than a standard complaint. It went directly to the Elder Council's legal review chamber. It was not something Vaughn could ignore, even if he had wanted to. He did not want to. He was angry about the intake fraud. That part had nothing to do with Sol or Rin. The Darath group's conclave charter was suspended for review within 72 hours. Set left Harrow 9 on the first available transport. The blocked complaints were reopened. Pell sent Sol a message that was mostly composed of gratitude and one very good recipe for something she called station bread. The station threw a small celebration. Someone put up decorations. There was music from 4 different species playing simultaneously, which was technically terrible, but nobody minded. A journalist from a Drakkar cultural network found Sol near the edge of the party and asked him, on record, what it felt like to be a living weapon. Sol thought about it for a moment. She does most of the heavy lifting, he said. I just try not to embarrass the species. The clip was 18 seconds long. Rin saw it on her data feed 3 hours later. She did not understand precisely why she found it so funny. She watched it 9 times. The formal challenge arrived by courier on a Tuesday. Not a digital message, not a conclave com, an actual physical document, folded and sealed with the Elder Council's mark, delivered by a young Drakkar official who handed it to Sol with the expression of someone doing a job they personally disagreed with, but were too professional to say so. Sol read it at the small desk in his quarters, then he read it again, then he went to find Rin. She was on the station's outer observation deck, watching a cargo freighter maneuver through the docking approach. She liked watching moving things. Sol had noticed this about her. She tracked movement the way other people track conversation. He handed her the document. She read it once. Her eyes moved slowly and very precisely across the page, the way a blade moves across a surface it is measuring for the cut. When she was done, she handed it back and returned her gaze to the freighter. They want a trial, she said. They want you to lose one, Sol said. There's a difference. The document was a formal challenge to the bonding, filed by Elder Vaughn on behalf of the Drakkar Traditionalist Council. The argument was cleanly constructed. Drakkar law required a weapon bearer to withstand the full combat force of their bonded dragon in a real engagement scenario. The purpose was historical. A weapon that broke under its own dragon's strength was useless. The trial was called the Standing, and it was real law, not ceremony. It had been invoked 4 times in 800 years, each time against a weapon bearer who had been judged unfit. The trial was set for a decommissioned battle training moon called Drev in neutral space in 3 weeks. The conclave full assembly would observe. The parameters were calibrated for Dragon-class combat. The document included the technical specifications. Sol read them carefully. The drones used in Stage 3 were rated for sustained engagement against Sorathi Iron Guard, a species with natural plating 3 centimeters thick and a pain tolerance that made human nerve endings look like a polite suggestion. No human had ever been certified against this tier of combat assessment. The designers of the trial had not, historically, needed to account for humans at all. Dara came to see Sol the next morning. She sat across from him and put her hands flat on the table, which was her way of saying she was going to be direct. "The math doesn't work," she said. "I've run it with 3 different consultants. A standard-issue human liaison officer cannot pass a Dragon-class trial, not with enhancements, not with armor, not with preparation. The physics are wrong." "I know," Sol said. "Then you understand that we need to file a counter-challenge. Argue the parameters are discriminatory. We have enough precedent to." "If we fight the trial, we lose," Sol said. "Vaughn's faction gets to say we refused on technical grounds. The story becomes that the bonding was only ever valid on paper." He looked at her. "I need to go." Dara stared at him. "Sol." "I know what the trial is," he said. "I'm not going in there thinking I can beat the physics. I'm going in thinking I can change the question." She was quiet for a long moment. "The conclave will be watching," she said. "Good," Sol said. "Then it counts." 2 days before the trial, Orin found Sol in the station's maintenance corridor, which was the kind of place where conversations could happen without observers. Orin was 2 decades older than Rin and had passed his own weapon choosing without incident. He had selected a neutron lance, which had been recorded as an excellent and appropriate choice. He was well regarded. He was also, Sol had noticed, watching Rin the way people watch something that outpaced them without quite realizing it. Orin stood at the corridor entrance, very still, and spoke without preamble. "Step aside," he said, "not as an insult, as advice. Rin needs a real weapon bearer, a proper one, the kind that does not need 3 weeks to prepare for a trial designed for entry-level candidates." Sol leaned against the corridor wall. "Entry-level by Dragon standards," he said. "That's a fairly high floor." "You will fail," Orin said. "And when you do, Rin will have to choose again, and this time the council will be watching every moment. It will be difficult for her. It will follow her." He paused. "Step aside now, and it is a quiet correction. Wait for the trial, and it becomes a wound." Sol considered this. He could see that Orin believed what he was saying. There was no cruelty in it. It was, from a certain angle, genuine. "Can I ask you something?" Sol said. Orin waited. "On the day of the ceremony," Sol said, "when she was walking the weapons spiral, were you watching her or the weapons?" A pause. "The weapons," Orin said, "as is traditional, to see what a dragon is drawn toward." "She was watching the room," Sol said. "The whole time. She walked the spiral and she looked like she was looking at weapons, but she was mapping exits, reading bodies, taking the temperature of every delegation in that hall. She had already decided the weapons weren't the point." He stood up straight. "She didn't point at me because I was impressive. She pointed at me because she saw what I was doing and she recognized it." Orin said nothing. "With respect," Sol said, "she didn't point at you." He walked past Orin and back toward the light. Orin stood in the corridor for a long time after that, doing the math. He did not like what the math was telling him. The moon Drev was gray and cold, and absolutely nothing grew on it. It had been used as a military training ground 200 years ago, then decommissioned when the border wars that required it ended. What was left was a flat, broken landscape of cracked rock and low ridges, dotted with the shells of old structures. The conclave had chosen it for the trial because it was neutral, it was empty, and its gravity was close enough to standard that the drone calibration tables were still accurate. The observer fleet sat in low orbit, 7 conclave ships, one from each senior member species. Broadcast feeds were running to 34,000 stations across the known galaxy. Elder Vaughn sat in the primary observation chamber with the trial judges. Orin sat in the gallery above, alone. Sol landed on the surface in a standard diplomatic shuttle. He stepped out in his regular uniform. No armor, no additional equipment beyond his liaison kit, a data pad, a comm unit, a small medical pack, and a multi-tool that he had owned for 8 years and fixed twice. The trial observers on the fleet noted this in the record. Several of them noted it multiple times, as if repetition would help it make more sense. Rin landed behind him. The impact of her landing cracked the rock around her feet in a ring. She folded her wings and stood beside him and said nothing. The trial announcer's voice came through the surface speakers, broadcasting live. The 3 stages were outlined. The drones were activated. Stage 1 began. 42 combat drones rose from the ridgeline in a spread formation. They were sized for mid-class engagements, each one roughly the mass of a personal transport, armed with directed energy emitters set to impact register mode. They were calibrated to push a target into cover, sustain pressure, and force a defensive breakdown. Against armor-plated species, this typically took 2 to 4 minutes before the weapon bearer was forced to call for dragon support, at which point the coordination stage began. Sol did not go into cover. He moved, constantly, smoothly, without wasted motion. He used the broken terrain the way someone uses a familiar room in the dark, without looking at his feet, without hesitating at the edges. He angled around ridges in patterns that disrupted the drone's targeting prediction. Directed energy emitters work on probability. They calculate where the target will be in 0.3 seconds and fire at that location. Sol moved in patterns that were irregular in exactly the right ways. Not random, irregular. There was a difference, and the drone systems were not designed to account for it. 7 minutes into Stage 1, no drone had landed a registered impact. The trial judges noted this. Stage 1 had no time limit. It was designed to be survived, not won. At the 12-minute mark, the judges conferred briefly and advanced the stage. Stage 2 was coordination. 6 targets appeared simultaneously across the field, each one marked with a different color that corresponded to a sequence the weapon bearer was supposed to call. The weapon bearer directed the dragon's strikes in order, testing communication speed and precision under pressure. Sol had been talking to Rin for 2 months, not about protocol, not about formal call signals, about real things, about the outering stations, about trade law, about what Karos's network was doing and why, about which exits he had checked and what he had seen when he checked them. They had built, without planning to, a shorthand made of short words and small gestures. He called 6 targets in 11 seconds, each one in a single syllable. Rin hit all 6. There was no wasted movement, no overlap, no missed shot. She hit them in sequence with the mechanical precision of something that had been doing this for a very long time, except she had not. She was 40 years old. She had never run this drill before. But she had a very good weapon. In the observer gallery, Orin leaned forward. Stage 3 was the breaking point. This was the stage designed to end the trial. The scenario placed the weapon bearer in a closing trap, a converging formation of drones that would force them toward a central point with no viable cover and no exit. The logical action for the weapon bearer was to call the dragon immediately and risk taking impact damage in the seconds before the dragon's strike cleared the formation. Most weapon bearers took 3 to 7 impacts in this stage. The stage measured whether they held through that damage and continued to function. The trap began to close. Sol moved toward it. Not away from it, toward it. The drone formation adjusted, recalculating. A target moving into a closing formation was not a standard parameter. The drone's tactical subroutines flagged it as anomalous and pushed the calculation forward by 0.6 seconds, which in combat systems is a significant delay. In that 0.6 seconds, Sol had already signaled Rin. Not a spoken call, a single motion with two fingers pointing through the formation at the open ground on the other side. Rin came through the opposite side of the formation at low altitude and at a speed that left a pressure wave across the rock that knocked 3 drones off their flight paths by pure concussive force. The strike cleared the trap from the inside out. Sol walked through the gap without taking a single impact. The stage ended in 11 seconds. The surface fell silent. In the observation chamber, one of the trial judges said something quietly to another judge. The second judge reviewed the stage recording. Then the first judge wrote a single line in the official trial notes. "We may need to update the definitions." The verdict came 17 minutes later. The bonding stood. Sol was confirmed as a valid weapon bearer under all applicable Drakkar legal definitions. Sol walked back across the cracked rock to where Rin stood, and they stood together for a moment in the cold grey air of a moon where nothing grew. "The others in your histories," Sol said, "the weapon bearers, how did they survive those trials?" "By being hard to kill," Rin said. "And me?" Rin was quiet for a moment. "You made it very difficult," she said, "for anything to find a good reason to kill you." Sol considered that. "Is that a compliment?" he asked. Rin looked at the grey sky. "It is the highest one I know," she said. 6 months has passed. Nobody made a speech about it. Nobody held a ceremony. The Galactic Conclave did not issue a formal statement declaring that something had changed. It did not work that way in Sol's experience. Big things rarely announced themselves. They just settled into the space where they had always been heading, and eventually you looked back and noticed the distance. The Drakkar Traditionalist Council had not changed their official position on humans. Their written record still described humanity as a young species, newly admitted, not yet fully understood. This was technically true and also managed to contain, in the way that carefully chosen words often did, a dozen unstated opinions. The position had not changed. But 3 of the 7 elders on the council had, quietly, begun requesting human liaison attachments for their diplomatic teams. Not Sol specifically, humans in general. They did not explain the requests. They did not need to. Requests from elders did not require justification. Dara received the first of these requests and read it twice before sending it on to the Terran diplomatic office. She did not comment on it. She filed it. She moved on, but she kept the original message. Delegate Karros had lost 2 major trade votes in the months following the Harrow 9 situation. He was also, as of 8 weeks ago, under a formal conclave ethics review. The review had been triggered by testimony from the freed Outering Station residents, detailed testimony, filed through the correct intake channel, in the correct format, citing the correct legal violation designations. Sol had helped Pell and her neighbors understand which forms to use. That was all. The rest they had done themselves. Karros's connection to the Durath group and its practices had become, through the cold machinery of proper procedure, a matter of official record. Sol had not testified. He had not needed to. On a grey afternoon at the Conclave's main diplomatic station, 6 months after the trial on Drev, Orin found Sol in the observation deck. The same one where Rin liked to watch cargo ships move through the docking approach. Rin was not there. She was in a council briefing. Sol was alone, reading reports. He was always reading reports. Orin stood at the entrance for a moment. Then he walked in and sat across from Sol without asking, which Sol noted but did not comment on. It was, he thought, probably progress. "I want to understand stage 3, Orin said. "Walk me through the calculation." Sol looked at him. Orin's face was difficult to read by human standards. Drakkar faces generally were, but Sol had spent 6 months learning Rin's expressions, and he had begun to develop a rough map for the species overall. What he saw on Orin's face was not hostility. It was the specific look of someone doing arithmetic they do not like and choosing, carefully, to keep doing it anyway. Sol picked up his datapad. He turned it over and, for lack of better paper, opened a blank input screen. He drew a simple diagram, the closing formation, the drone positions, the 0.6-second recalculation window, the geometry of where Rin needed to be and when. He talked for 20 minutes. He used simple words. He did not explain it as a tactic or a system. He explained it as a problem. Here is what was happening. Here is what the problem needed. Here is what I had available. Orin listened without interrupting. When Sol was finished, Orin stared at the diagram for a long time. "This is not a warrior's logic," Orin said. "No," Sol said, "it's not." Orin was quiet. Then, without ceremony or preamble, he said, "Teach me." Sol looked at him. "Which part?" Sol asked. "The part," Orin said slowly, "where you look at the trap and see the gap." Sol set the datapad down. "That's not a technique," Sol said. "That's a habit. You build it over time by asking, every time you walk into a room, what's actually happening here, and what does everyone else think is happening, and where are those two things different?" He paused. "It helps if you eat something while you're doing it. Low blood sugar makes the second question harder." Orin stared at him. "I am attempting to request your instructions seriously," Orin said. "I know," Sol said, "and I'm answering you seriously." He picked up his datapad again. "I'll start you with the basics. It's going to be boring for a while. That's normal. Stick with it." Orin stayed for 3 hours. When the Conclave's official annual registry was updated that cycle, a new entry had been added to the Drakkar section. The registry was a formal document. It was dry and precise and not designed for narrative. It listed names, designations, status, and classifications. Under Rin's entry, the weapon-bearer line now read: Sol Human Terran Federation, Bond confirmed, classification unprecedented. Below the entry, in the notes field, a field that was rarely used, because Elder Vaughn had not personally submitted a registry note in 60 years, was a single line. It read, "She chose correctly." Somewhere on a mid-ring station, in a briefing room full of Elder Council observers who were waiting for Rin to present the quarterly Outering security report, Rin was at the front of the room, explaining the situation with calm and precise language. Sol was at the back of the room. He had a protein bar. He was reading the updated incident reports from Harrow 9, which were looking better every month. He had already checked the exits. He had already noted, without looking like he was noting it, which 3 of the council observers were paying attention to the presentation, and which 3 were performing attention while thinking about something else entirely. He had also noted which one was watching Rin with the specific quality of focus that meant they were forming an opinion they had not arrived with. He filed this information in the back of his mind in the orderly, quiet way he filed most things, for later, because later was usually when it became useful. Rin did not look at him during the briefing. She did not need to. She was not worried at all.